The palace had survived scandals, betrayals, silent rivalries, and years of carefully managed appearances, but nothing could have prepared it for this. When William reportedly confirmed Catherine's coronation for March 15, the shockwave was immediate. Yet it was not the date alone that sent royal watchers into chaos. It was the devastating absence attached to it. Camilla would not be attending. And in that single detail, everything changed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What should have sounded like a proud royal milestone instead landed like a thunderclap across an institution already trembling beneath the surface. The words themselves were simple enough, almost controlled, almost measured, but that was precisely what made them so powerful. William did not sound like a man merely passing along ceremonial news. He sounded like someone closing one chapter and opening another with full awareness that the decision would leave scars. In a monarchy where every phrase is weighed, every appearance is calibrated, and every silence is often louder than speech, this confirmation carried the force of something much greater than protocol. It felt like authority. It felt like intention. And to many watching closely, it felt like a declaration that the future had already been decided. That is why Catherine's coronation immediately began to feel larger than tradition, larger than symbolism, even larger than the crown itself. This was not being received as a routine royal event moving neatly along the tracks of history. It felt like a turning point, the kind that does not simply mark time but divides it. There was a before, when tensions could still be hidden behind palace walls and carefully polished smiles. And now there was an after, where one announcement had thrown everything into harsher light. Catherine was no longer just being admired, supported, or anticipated. She was being elevated in a way that suggested permanence, inevitability, and a new center of gravity within the royal family. But if her rise gave the moment its grandeur, Camilla's absence gave it its danger. That was the detail that shattered the illusion of uncomplicated celebration. Because royal absences are never empty. They carry meaning. And sometimes they carry warning. What the public may have first heard as a scheduling decision quickly took on the shape of something much darker, much more personal, much more revealing. A coronation can unite a family in public, but one missing figure can expose everything that unity is trying to hide. Suddenly, this was no longer just a story about Catherine stepping forward. It was also a story about someone else not standing beside her. And in royal life, who is not present can become more important than who is. That is where the atmosphere changed most sharply. The announcement did not simply ignite excitement, it unsettled the emotional balance of the monarchy itself. Insiders, observers, critics, and loyalists all seemed to sense the same thing at once. This moment had consequences far beyond ceremony. William's confirmation was being read not only as support for Catherine, but as a move loaded with emotional and political force. It raised uncomfortable questions. Had this been building for longer than anyone admitted? Had the fault lines inside the palace widened to the point where even major royal moments could no longer conceal them? And perhaps most striking of all, was William doing more than confirming Catherine's rise? Was he, in his own controlled and unmistakable way, drawing a line in the sand? Because once the date was spoken aloud and Camilla's absence became impossible to ignore, attention shifted away from the ceremony itself and toward the bitter, silent war that may have made this moment inevitable. A coronation is supposed to symbolize unity, continuity, and the triumph of tradition. But this one arrived carrying something darker. Behind the polished language and royal formality, March 15 began to feel less like a celebration and more like the climax of a private reckoning. Catherine's rise was being prepared in full view of the world, yet the emotional undertow beneath it suggested that not everyone inside the palace wanted this moment to happen so cleanly. Because that is what made this moment so unsettling. On the surface, it was the kind of royal milestone designed to reassure the nation, to wrap the future in the comfort of ritual and let history appear stable once again. But beneath that carefully guarded surface, the meaning of Catherine's coronation was expanding into something far more powerful. This was no longer just about ceremony, title, or succession. It was beginning to look like a transfer of something far more intimate and far more difficult to win back once lost. Moral authority, emotional loyalty, and the kind of public admiration that cannot be ordered staged, or inherited by force. And in that sense, Catherine's rise felt seismic, because people were not merely preparing to see her crowned. They were preparing to see her confirmed as the emotional center of a monarchy desperate for renewal. That is precisely why Catherine's image gave the event such unusual force. Over time, she had come to represent qualities the public still longed to believe could survive inside the royal institution. Grace under pressure, discipline without coldness, endurance without complaint, and devotion that seemed steady even when the ground beneath her was clearly shifting. She did not appear to rise through noise or through open confrontation. She rose through patience, through control, through a quiet resilience that only became more powerful the more the palace around her seemed vulnerable to instability. And because of that, this coronation did not feel like a simple reward. It felt like recognition, the kind that arrives after years of proving, silently and relentlessly, that one person has become bigger than the role she was once expected merely to occupy. Yet for all the grandeur surrounding Catherine's moment, unease continued to cling to it like a shadow that would not lift. Under normal circumstances, a coronation of this scale should have generated nothing but pride, celebration, and the illusion of complete royal unity. Instead, Camilla's non-attendance gave the entire occasion a sharp and haunting edge. Her absence did not sit quietly at the margins of the story. It invaded the center of it. It turned what should have been a triumph into a question mark. Because when one of the monarchy's central figures is missing from a moment this consequential, the silence becomes impossible to contain. It suggests hurt. It suggests fracture. It suggests that beneath the formal language and the measured statements, something unresolved is still bleeding through. And that was why this coronation began to feel like more than the start of Catherine's reign in the public imagination. It felt like the unveiling of a new royal era, one that seemed to carry within it an unspoken correction of everything the monarchy had struggled to manage in recent years. Not through direct confession, not through open admission, but through symbolism so powerful it barely needed explaining. The deeper meaning of the moment was no longer resting in the crown alone. It was beginning to rest in what that crown appeared to replace. What kind of legacy it seemed to push gently aside, and what kind of future it was now asking the public to embrace. And the more Catherine's moment began to look like the beginning of a new royal chapter, the more one unavoidable question rose to the surface. What exactly had happened between William and Camilla behind palace walls? Royal absences are never just absences. In a family built on symbolism, every appearance means something, and every disappearance means even more. So when news spread that Camilla would not attend Catherine's coronation, it was received not as a personal choice, but as a thunderclap. Because in a monarchy obsessed with image, protocol, and perception, failing to appear at a moment this significant can only mean one thing: something has broken. That was why the reaction moved so quickly from curiosity to alarm. In ordinary families, absence can be explained away with polite excuses and private understanding. But inside a monarchy, especially one sustained by ritual, timing, and public interpretation, absence becomes its own statement. It speaks without permission. It suggests without confirming. And more often than not, it reveals what official language is desperately trying to contain. Camilla's non-attendance was never going to be read as a minor scheduling complication or a forgettable footnote attached to Catherine's rise. It arrived like a coded message broadcast through silence, and the message many believed they heard was devastating. The unity of the royal household was no longer strong enough to perform itself on command. That is the burden of symbolism in royal life. Every seat filled, every smile exchanged, every public gesture is measured not only for what it shows, but for what it conceals. So when one of the most recognizable figures in the royal structure is missing from a coronation of this magnitude, the conclusion becomes almost unavoidable. People do not simply see absence, they interpret it. They search it for signs of status, exclusion, conflict, and emotional defeat. They ask who was left out, who refused, who could not bear to attend, and who may have decided that presence would have signaled surrender. In that sense, Camilla's absence became more than noticeable. It became legible. A silence so specific, so public, and so impossible to ignore that it began to say more than any palace briefing ever could. And the emotional force of that silence only deepened when placed beside Catherine's ascent. Because this was not a random royal event unfolding in neutral conditions. This was Catherine rising into one of the most powerful symbolic moments of her life, and doing so without Camilla there to witness it. That fact alone changed the emotional shape of the story. It gave the coronation an edge of estrangement, almost of judgment, as though one woman's elevation was unfolding in the space created by another woman's withdrawal. Whether that withdrawal was chosen freely or forced by circumstances no one wished to speak aloud, the impact was the same. The absence felt personal, it felt historical, and for many watching it felt impossible not to link it to years of tension that had never fully disappeared, only gone quiet enough to survive. Because quiet bitterness has a way of becoming more dangerous over time, not less. Old rivalries do not need public arguments to remain alive. Sometimes they grow stronger in silence, fed by protocol, protected by courtesy, and sharpened by the knowledge that every grievance must remain hidden behind formality. Competing loyalties, clashing visions for the monarchy, buried resentments, and the struggle over who truly defines the future of the crown may all have been moving beneath the surface long before this moment arrived. If so, then Camilla's absence was not merely sad or awkward. It was explosive. A public humiliation if it was imposed. A private statement if it was chosen. Either way, it carried the sting of finality. And perhaps that is what made the palace response feel so fragile. One could almost sense the effort to soften the meaning, to preserve the fiction that this was manageable, understandable, temporary. But some truths are too large to be hidden once symbolism begins doing the talking. The more the narrative was smoothed, the more the fracture seemed to show through, which raised a darker possibility still, that Camilla's absence was not the start of this crisis at all, but the aftermath of a confrontation whose outcome had already been decided long before the public ever heard a word. And once the palace began feeling less like a family institution and more like a battlefield divided by loyalty, attention turned to the one person standing at the very center of that divide, Catherine herself. Catherine's power was never built through noise. It was built through patience, precision, and an almost unshakable understanding of what the monarchy needed when it was most vulnerable. That is what makes this coronation so explosive. It is not simply the elevation of a popular princess. It is the formal recognition of a woman whose influence may have already outgrown the palace's old hierarchy, and whose presence has become impossible to challenge. That is why her rise carries such force in this story. Catherine does not feel like a figure lifted suddenly by fashion, sympathy, or temporary excitement. She feels earned. Over time, through pressure that would have broken weaker people, she became something the monarchy could not easily replace. A stabilizing force in an institution that too often seemed trapped between duty and damage. While others were associated with noise, uncertainty, rivalry, and the exhausting weight of old wounds, Catherine came to represent steadiness. She appeared to understand, perhaps better than anyone around her, that the crown no longer survived on tradition alone. It survived on trust. And trust, once fractured, cannot be demanded back. It must be rebuilt slowly, painfully, and with absolute control. That was the work she seemed to be doing long before anyone spoke openly about coronation. This is what gives her ascent such emotional power. It does not read as succession in the cold, mechanical sense, as though one title is simply passing neatly into another pair of hands. It feels deeper than that. It feels like emotional legitimacy finally catching up to public reality. For years, Catherine had occupied a strange and powerful space within the royal narrative. She was visible, admired, and watched closely, yet her real importance seemed to extend beyond appearances. People did not merely see her as part of the future. Many had already begun to feel that she was holding together the emotional credibility of the monarchy in the present. That kind of influence changes everything, because once a figure begins to embody reassurance itself, the institution starts leaning toward that person whether it admits it or not. And that is where the danger enters. Catherine's strength was measured, composed, and disciplined, but it rose within a palace atmosphere increasingly haunted by strain. The more stable she appeared, the more unstable everything around her began to look by contrast. Her calm did not just soothe the institution, it exposed the turbulence within it. Her discipline did not simply inspire loyalty, it made competing figures seem less secure. In that way, her image may have slowly eclipsed older structures of influence without ever needing to challenge them directly. She did not have to seize power loudly for the balance to shift toward her. It shifted because people, both inside and outside the palace, began to see her as the answer to anxieties the monarchy had failed to quiet on its own. That kind of rise creates admiration, but it can also create fear. Because when one person becomes too closely associated with renewal, dignity, and the future, those who benefited from the old order may begin to feel the ground moving beneath them. Catherine could be loved and resented at the same time, embraced publicly while privately seen as a threat to existing loyalties and older claims to influence. Her inevitability was part of her power, but it may also have been the very thing that unsettled Camilla most. Not because inevitability is cruel by nature, but because it leaves less and less room for anyone standing in its path. And as Catherine's coronation drew closer, that inevitability no longer felt symbolic. It felt final. Which is why many may have read this moment not only as a ceremonial triumph, but as a moral victory. Catherine's rise seemed to affirm a certain kind of royal strength, quiet, enduring, disciplined, and publicly trusted over a past increasingly associated with division, discomfort, and unresolved tension. Yet moral victories inside royal life rarely come without emotional casualties. Because when one figure becomes the undeniable center of the monarchy's future, others do not simply fade. They begin to feel displaced, diminished, perhaps even erased. But if Catherine's ascent looked inevitable from the outside, the emotional cost of that inevitability may have been growing in silence for far longer than the public ever knew. Some royal conflicts explode in public. Others survive for years in glances, protocol, seating plans, silences, and the carefully chosen language of people who can never say what they truly mean. This appeared to be one of those wars. Long before the coronation date was confirmed, long before Camilla's absence became headline news, there were signs that something cold, personal, and irreversible had been developing beneath the polished surface of royal unity. That is what made this story feel so dangerous. It did not carry the chaos of a sudden argument or the simplicity of one dramatic falling out. It carried the heavier, darker feeling of something that had been building for years, hidden inside routine, protected by custom, and sharpened by repetition. In royal life, emotional conflict rarely announces itself openly. It survives in controlled expressions, in who stands where, in who is acknowledged warmly and who is merely tolerated, in small ceremonial choices that appear harmless to the outside world but mean everything to those trapped inside them. And when tension is forced to live that way for too long, it does not disappear. It hardens. It becomes colder, quieter, and far more difficult to reverse. That is why the possibility of a long simmering rivalry matters so much here. Catherine's rise did not happen in one sudden leap. It unfolded gradually, through years of discipline, growing public devotion, and a steady expansion of her influence within the royal story. But every rise changes the emotional balance around it. Every new center of gravity creates unease somewhere else. The more Catherine came to represent continuity, trust, and the future, the more others within the palace may have felt their own relevance narrowing. And that kind of shift is never purely political. It becomes deeply personal. Because inside a monarchy, status is not just about title. It is about proximity, perception, significance, and the haunting fear of being moved quietly to the margins while someone else becomes indispensable. That is where legacy enters the conflict and makes it even more volatile. This was never likely to be just about personality or preference. It may have grown into a deeper struggle over what the monarchy should become, and who would be allowed to define that transformation. Catherine's growing prominence could be seen as hope by some, but by others it may have felt like displacement. A future built around her did not merely suggest change, it suggested replacement. And for figures shaped by an older order, that implication would not have felt abstract. It would have felt immediate, emotional, almost existential. The battle then may not have been only over public image, but over meaning itself, who still mattered, who no longer set the tone, and whose version of royal power was quietly losing its hold. What makes royal protocol so ruthless is that it disguises these battles while also making them more painful. Ordinary families can argue, accuse, and collapse in the open. Royal families are forced to preserve form while emotion rots underneath it. They must keep smiling while sensing the withdrawal of trust. They must keep observing etiquette while every gesture becomes another reminder of what has shifted. In that environment, even silence becomes a weapon. Even courtesy can wound. And over time, the lack of direct confrontation does not preserve peace. It creates a colder kind of warfare, one where every unresolved feeling is compressed into ritual until the smallest break in composure feels catastrophic. William may have seen that more clearly than anyone. Watching the tension build, watching Catherine become both cherished and controversial within the palace dynamic, he may have reached a point where mediation no longer felt possible. Some divides become too deep for compromise because compromise itself begins to look like surrender. If that happened here, then his later confirmation of Catherine's coronation was not the beginning of his involvement. It was the public expression of a choice already made in private. And Camilla's absence, rather than being an isolated shock, may have been the final visible crack in a structure that had been weakening for far longer than anyone was willing to admit. Which leaves one final, unsettling possibility hanging over everything: that the true turning point did not happen in public at all. It may have happened behind closed doors, in a private confrontation no one was ever supposed to witness, where restraint finally gave way to decision, and the future of the monarchy was no longer debated, but settled. And if there truly was a moment when everything changed behind closed doors, then the coronation announcement was not the start of the story at all, it was the aftermath. Every royal crisis seems to trace back to one hidden conversation, the meeting no cameras captured, the exchange no official statement ever fully explains. In this story, that unseen moment feels impossible to ignore. Because by the time William confirmed Catherine's coronation and Camilla's absence became public, the emotional outcome already felt decided. Somewhere behind those palace doors, something was said, refused, or revealed, and nothing after that was ever going to look the same again. That is why this entire royal drama seems to bend toward one private moment, one sealed encounter where the careful balance inside the palace may finally have collapsed. Public statements always come later. Ceremonies come later. Official language comes later. But the real story, the one that changes everything, usually begins in a room the public never sees. A room where the masks fall just enough for truth to breathe. And in this case, it feels increasingly impossible to believe that Catherine's coronation was confirmed. Camilla's absence was accepted, and the palace moved forward without some decisive internal confrontation that forced every hidden tension into the open. By the time the public heard the announcement, the emotional battle already seemed over. That is what makes the silence around that unseen meeting so loud. It is not difficult to imagine why that encounter would have carried such intensity. William, after years of restraint, may have entered it no longer interested in smoothing over discomfort or preserving old arrangements that no longer matched the future he believed had to be protected. If Catherine's coronation represented more than ceremony, if it represented renewal, stability, and the emotional recovery of the monarchy itself, then William may have defended that future in terms that left no room for hesitation. Not as a husband pleading for recognition, but as a man who had reached the point where compromise no longer looked wise. It looked dangerous. And once that kind of conviction enters a royal conflict, everything becomes harder, sharper, and far more final. That possibility becomes even more explosive if Camilla did not quietly accept the meaning of Catherine's rise. What if the coronation itself became the point of challenge? Not necessarily in open rebellion, but in the colder language of timing, symbolism, precedence, and what this moment would truly communicate to the public. Because that is how royal disputes often hide their deepest emotions. They do not arrive dressed as feelings. They arrive dressed as concerns, cautions, procedural objections, and carefully worded resistance. But beneath those polished arguments may have been something far more painful, a struggle over legacy, influence, and belonging. A fear that Catherine's coronation would not merely elevate one woman, but confirm that another had already begun to lose her place in the emotional architecture of the monarchy. And if that was the true substance of the confrontation, then the stakes were far greater than attendance at a ceremony. This would have been about who gets to shape the crown's next chapter, whose voice still holds power inside the institution, and who must now live with the unbearable realization that the future is moving without them. In that kind of room, words do not simply wound. They settle things. They define where loyalty stands. They reveal which relationships can survive the transition, and which ones were already too damaged to recover. That is why this unseen meeting feels less like speculation and more like the hidden engine behind everything that followed. The public announcement did not create the fracture. It exposed the result of a decision already reached. Because that is how royal crises work. The world notices them only when they can no longer be disguised. By then, the most important choices have already been made in private, locked into place behind closed doors, while the institution prepares its calmest possible language for a reality that is anything but calm. If reconciliation had once been possible, this may have been the moment it slipped away. And if so, then March 15 is no longer simply the day of Catherine's coronation. It becomes something much heavier, the public proof that a private battle ended with one side ascending and the other left outside the moment that mattered most. Which is why March 15 no longer looks like just a coronation date, it looks like the day the monarchy intends to show the world which future it has chosen. Dates become powerful when they stop representing time and start representing judgment. March 15 now carries that kind of force. It has become a deadline, a symbol, and perhaps even a verdict on years of tension inside the royal family. Catherine's coronation is no longer merely an event to witness. It is a moment that may publicly confirm who the monarchy trusts, who it elevates, and who it is prepared to move beyond. That is why March 15 feels heavier than a ceremony ever should. It no longer stands as a simple point on the calendar, neatly framed by tradition and royal formality. It now feels like the symbolic climax of a struggle that has been unfolding in whispers, silences, careful gestures, and private decisions for far longer than the public has been allowed to understand. Everything that once appeared vague has begun to narrow toward this one day. Every emotional fracture, every question of loyalty, every shifting balance of influence seems to gather here. And because of that, the coronation has taken on the weight of a verdict. It suggests that the monarchy is not merely honoring custom. It is choosing direction. It is choosing meaning. And, perhaps most painfully, it is choosing who belongs at the heart of its future. That is what makes the event feel so much larger than ritual. A coronation is meant to reassure, to anchor the institution in continuity, and to remind the world that the crown survives beyond personal conflict. But this moment seems to be doing something else as well. It appears to be declaring an institutional choice. Catherine's rise now feels bound up with the monarchy's attempt to redefine itself, to attach its future to a figure who represents trust, endurance, and emotional legitimacy. In that sense, March 15 is not simply about what is being crowned. It is about what is being endorsed. It is about what the institution appears ready to protect, and what it may finally be willing to leave behind. And that is where Camilla's absence changes everything. Without that absence, the day might still have been historic, but it would not have felt quite so charged. With it, the ceremony becomes emotionally loaded in a way no palace statement can neutralize. Because absence does not remain at the edges of a moment like this, it enters the center of it. It lingers in every interpretation, every act of celebration, every official attempt to project harmony. Even those who are not present can dominate the emotional atmosphere if their absence feels meaningful enough. And this one does. Camilla's non-attendance transforms the day from a coronation into a statement. It tells the public that something unresolved has reached the point where not even the monarchy's most sacred rituals can fully conceal it. That is why March 15 may do more than mark Catherine's ascent. It may reshape how people remember the recent history of royal power itself. What once looked like a complicated balance of personalities and influence may, in retrospect, begin to look like a slow transition toward this very outcome. Catherine's coronation could become the moment when that transition is no longer inferred but confirmed. The day when public admiration, institutional necessity, and personal loyalty finally converge in one unmistakable image of where the monarchy believes its survival lies. And if that is true, then the event will not just define Catherine. It will define the institution that chose her as the face of its next chapter. Still, the palace will undoubtedly try to present unity, dignity, and seamless continuity. That is what monarchies do when history turns sharp beneath their feet. But symbolism has a way of escaping control. The formal words may speak of tradition, but the emotional truth will be harder to suppress. Because once the day arrives, everyone will feel what is missing as intensely as what is present. And when that happens, the monarchy may discover that some transitions do not heal old relationships. They expose how far those relationships had already fallen apart. And that is what makes the final question so haunting, because once Catherine is crowned and Camilla is nowhere in sight, the monarchy will not just be entering a new era, it may be closing the door on an old one forever. In the end, royal history is rarely shaped only by the people who step forward. It is also shaped by the people left standing outside the moment. That is why this story lingers with such force. William's confirmation, Catherine's coronation, and Camilla's absence together form something far bigger than palace drama. They form a portrait of succession through emotion, power through silence, and a future being claimed at a cost the public may only just be beginning to understand. What makes this final chapter so powerful is that none of these elements can be separated anymore. William's authority, Catherine's rise, and Camilla's absence no longer feel like parallel developments unfolding at the same time. They feel like one single transformation, one tightly bound story in which each part gives meaning to the others. William's confirmation did more than acknowledge a coronation. It revealed the direction of the monarchy under pressure. Catherine's ascent did more than fulfill expectation. It crystallized where public faith, emotional loyalty, and institutional hope had been gathering for years. And Camilla's absence did more than create discomfort. It exposed the cost of that realignment. Together they form a turning point that feels less like ceremony and more like a royal verdict on what the crown now believes it must become in order to survive. That future, as William appears to imagine it, seems to rest on something the monarchy has too often struggled to secure: clarity. Not confusion hidden behind formality. Not divided loyalties dressed up as balance. Not survival through endless avoidance. But clarity built through discipline, emotional legitimacy, and the careful restoration of trust. Catherine fits that future with unusual force, because she seems to embody exactly what the institution now needs the public to believe in again. Steadiness. Patience. Strength without chaos. Duty without visible bitterness. In that sense, her coronation becomes far more than recognition. It becomes the emotional sealing of a new royal order, one that seeks not merely to continue the monarchy, but to cleanse and redefine it. And yet royal symbolism is never merciful. It reveals truths even while official language tries to conceal them. Statements can be polished. Appearances can be arranged. Ceremonies can be wrapped in reverence and national pride. But symbolism slips through those defenses. It tells harsher truths because it does not need to accuse directly. It only needs to show who stands at the center, who stands beside them, and who is nowhere to be found. That is why Camilla's absence may become one of the defining images of this transition even without a single frame to capture it. Some absences become unforgettable precisely because they are felt rather than seen. They hang over the moment, shaping its meaning from the edges, impossible to erase because everyone understands what should have been there and was not. That is what makes this transition so emotionally devastating beneath its triumph. Something has clearly been gained. A new center of power has emerged. A new symbol of royal legitimacy has been crowned. A future built around Catherine has moved from implication to reality. But something has also been lost. And what is lost in royal history can be just as important as what is won. Influence does not disappear quietly without leaving wounds. Old orders do not retreat without bitterness. Personal loyalties do not collapse without consequence. This coronation may therefore be remembered not only for the woman who rose, but for the chapter of influence that ended in silence as she did. Because that is the final truth at the heart of this story. Power in the monarchy is never only inherited. It must also be accepted, defended, and sometimes painfully redefined when the institution can no longer survive on tradition alone. Catherine's triumph may stand at the center of this moment, but the deeper drama lies in what her triumph confirms. That the future has been chosen, that the lines have been drawn, and that once the crown is placed, history will not simply remember who stepped forward. It will remember who could no longer stand within the circle of power when the moment finally arrived. Because when the crown is placed, The applause will tell one story, but the silence surrounding who was missing may tell the one no one inside the palace can ever fully contain. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.